The thunder rolled across the vast Texas sky as Katherine Kendricks clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, her once fine dress mudded and torn from days on the run. The year was 1878, and she had nothing left but the clothes on her back and a past she desperately wanted to escape. Rain poured mercilessly as she stumbled toward the dimly lit saloon at the edge of Laredo, the only building showing signs of life in the storm-darkened street. The harsh weather matched Katherine's fortunes, which had plummeted faster than a stone in a well. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the respectable daughter of a businessman in San Antonio. Now, she was a fugitive not from the law, but from the powerful man who destroyed her family and threatened her life. She paused at the saloon's entrance, water dripping from her once elegant hat. The sound of raucous laughter and tinny piano music spilled into the night. Katherine knew a saloon was no place for a woman of her upbringing, but desperation had a way of reshaping one's principles. Her hand trembled as she pushed open the swinging doors. The noise inside dulled momentarily as several heads turned to look at the bedraggled woman in the doorway. Katherine kept her eyes lowered, making her way to the bar while ignoring the curious glances and whispers. "What can I get you, miss?" the bartender asked, eyeing her with a mixture of suspicion and pity. Katherine swallowed hard. "I'm looking for work." The bartender's expression softened slightly. "Ain't got no proper work for a lady here, unless you're looking to entertain the men upstairs." Katherine's face flushed with humiliation. "No, sir, I can clean, serve drinks, anything respectable," the man snorted. "Respectable ain't exactly our specialty, miss. Please," she whispered, desperation edging her voice. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." Before the bartender could respond, a commotion erupted at the poker table. A large man stood up abruptly, overturning his chair. "You're cheating, Zane," he bellowed, pointing an accusing finger at another man whose face remained calm despite the accusation. The man called Zane didn't rise from his seat. "Sit down, Buford. You're just sore about losing." Katherine watched the exchange with mounting anxiety. The last thing she needed was to be caught in the middle of a saloon brawl. She began to back away when the angry man drew his pistol. "I want my money back, you snake." What happened next occurred so quickly that Katherine barely registered the sequence of events. The seated man moved with astonishing speed, drawing his own weapon and firing before Buford could squeeze his trigger. The larger man crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. The saloon erupted into chaos. Katherine found herself shoved against the bar as patrons scrambled to get away from the altercation. The man called Zane stood up calmly, holstered his weapon, and collected his winnings from the table. It was then that Katherine got her first clear look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the dust of the trail on his clothes, but there was something distinguished about his bearing. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. He appeared to be in his early 30s, and despite the violence of moments ago, he moved with controlled precision. As the bartender rushed to deal with the wounded man, Katherine found herself alone at the bar. Her legs wobbled from exhaustion and hunger, and she clutched the edge of the counter to steady herself. The cowboy approached the bar, standing just a few feet from her. He ordered whiskey in a deep, resonant voice, then turned slightly to observe her. "You look like you could use a meal, madam," he said quietly. Katherine stiffened. "I'm not looking for charity, sir. Didn't say it was charity." He tossed back his drink in one swallow. "Just an observation." She glanced at him warily. "I'll manage." The bartender returned, wiping blood from his hands with a rag. "That fool Buford's gonna live, no thanks to you, Zane. Sheriff's gonna be mighty upset about another shooting in my establishment." The cowboy Zane shrugged. "Self-defense," He drew first. Always does seem to work out that way for you, the bartender muttered, then noticed Katherine still standing there. Look, miss, I ain't got work for you. Best try the hotel down the street if you're needing honest employment. Katherine nodded dejectedly and turned to leave, but a wave of dizziness overcame her. She swayed dangerously and might have fallen if not for the strong hand that caught her elbow. Whoa there, Zane said, steadying her. When's the last time you ate something proper? I told you I don't need, Katherine began, but her protest was cut short as her knees buckled beneath her. Frank, Zane called to the bartender, bring some food from the kitchen and coffee. I'm not running a charity, Frank grumbled. Zane fixed him with a hard stare. Put it on my tab. The bartender muttered something under his breath, but disappeared through a door behind the bar. Zane guided Katherine to a table in the corner, away from the curious eyes of the remaining patrons. I can't repay you, she said weakly as she sat down. Not asking you to. His voice remained neutral, neither overly familiar nor unkind. When Frank returned with a plate of stew and a cup of coffee, Katherine's resolve crumbled at the sight and smell of food. She ate with as much dignity as she could muster, though her hands trembled with every spoonful. Preston Zane, the cowboy said after she'd taken a few bites. Most folks just call me Zane. Katherine hesitated before responding. Katherine Kendricks. What brings you to Laredo in such a state, Miss Kendricks? She set down her spoon, suddenly wary. Misfortune. Seems to be plenty of that going around. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. You running from something or someone? Why would you think that? Katherine asked defensively. A well-bred lady doesn't typically stumble into a saloon on the edge of town unless she's desperate. And desperation usually comes from running towards something or away from something. Katherine remained silent, focusing on her food. Either way, Zane continued, Laredo might not be the safest place for a woman alone right now. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted quietly. Zane nodded as if her answer confirmed something for him. I've got a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Need someone to help with the cooking and housekeeping. Previous housekeeper left to get married last month. Katherine's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I don't know you, Mr. Zane. No, you don't, he acknowledged with a slight nod. But you need work and I need help. It's honest employment with room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the house. The offer was tempting, frighteningly so, but Katherine had learned the hard way that men rarely offered something for nothing. Why would you help me? She asked. Maybe I'm just tired of my own cooking, he replied with the ghost of a smile. Or maybe I recognize someone who's down on their luck but hasn't given up. I've been there myself. Before Katherine could respond, the saloon doors burst open and a group of men entered, laughing loudly. One of them pointed in her direction. Well, look what we got here. Ain't you a pretty little thing, even all soaked through? Katherine tensed, her heart racing as the man approached their table. Zane's expression hardened and he rose to his feet slowly, positioning himself between Katherine and the newcomer. Evening, Reynolds, Zane said, his voice deceptively casual. The lady's not interested in company. The man called Reynolds sneered, alcohol fuming from his breath. Don't recall asking your permission, Zane. Maybe the lady wants to make some money tonight. I said, Zane repeated, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. She's not interested. The saloon fell silent as the two men faced off. Katherine held her breath, remembering all too vividly what had happened the last time someone challenged Preston Zane. Reynolds' gaze flickered between Zane's face and his hand near the pistol. After a tense moment, he spat on the floor and backed away. Keep your scraps, Zane. Plenty of other willing women in this town. As Reynolds and his companions moved to another part of the saloon, Katherine exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she murmured. Zane returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. "Offer stands. Job at my ranch if you want it. Or I can give you money for a room at the hotel tonight." Katherine weighed her options. Staying in town meant risking encounters like the one that had just occurred or worse, being found by the men she was running from. Going with this stranger to his isolated ranch carried its own risks, but something in his direct gaze suggested he was a man of his word. "I'll take the job," she said finally, "but I want to be clear that it's just work I'm agreeing to." Zane nodded. "Just work." "You'll have your privacy and my respect, Miss Kendricks. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. I've got a room at the hotel where you can clean up and rest tonight." Katherine hesitated. "Mr. Zane, I don't deserve such kindness from a stranger." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting something that might have been understanding. "Then I'll teach you what you deserve now," he said quietly. "And it starts with being treated like a human being worthy of basic decency." The words struck Katherine deeply, touching a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. She blinked rapidly to dispel the threat of tears and nodded her acceptance. True to his word, Zane escorted her to the hotel, arranged for a room, and left her at the door with a promise to meet her in the lobby at dawn. For the first time in weeks, Katherine locked a door behind her and felt something close to safe. The morning arrived with clear skies and the promise of scorching heat later in the day. Katherine had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by memories of her father's murder and her own narrow escape. She wore the same dress, now cleaned as best she could manage with the basin of water in her room, and waited in the lobby as instructed. Preston Zane arrived precisely at dawn, looking no different than he had the night before, as if the man and his clothes were one weathered, functional unit. He tipped his hat in greeting. "Ready, Miss Kendricks?" "Yes," she replied, though ready was hardly the word for the uncertainty churning in her stomach. Outside the hotel, a wagon waited alongside a magnificent chestnut stallion. Zane helped her onto the wagon seat before mounting his horse. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch," he explained. "Road can be rough in places." As they left Laredo behind, Katherine took in the vast landscape spreading before them. The Texas terrain was both beautiful and unforgiving, much like the man riding silently beside the wagon. "Mr. Zane," she ventured after they'd traveled for some time, "you mentioned you've been down on your luck before." He glanced at her, then returned his gaze to the horizon. "Everyone has a story, Miss Kendricks. Some are just more complicated than others. And yours?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Curious, aren't you?" Katherine flushed. "I apologize. It's not my place to pry." "No need for apologies. Let's just say I wasn't always a rancher. Spent years drifting, taking whatever work came my way. Some of it I'm proud of, some I'm not." "How did you come to own a ranch?" "Won it in a poker game 5 years ago," he answered, surprising her. "Previous owner was a gambler who'd run it into the ground. Didn't know the first thing about ranching when I started, but I learned." Katherine absorbed this information. "Is that how you make your living now? Ranching?" "Mostly." His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. They continued in silence for a while, the rhythm of the wagon and the horse's hooves creating a hypnotic cadence. Katherine found herself relaxing slightly, watching the landscape gradually transform from flat plains to gently rolling hills. "Your turn," Zane said unexpectedly. "What brought you to Laredo in such a state?" Katherine tensed. "I'd rather not discuss it." "Fair enough," he nodded. "But whoever you're running from, they're not the type to give up easily, are they?" She stared at him in alarm. "Why would you say that? The way you keep checking over your shoulder. The fear in your eyes when those men came into the saloon last night. Zane's gaze met hers, keen and assessing. You're looking for more than just work, Miss Kendricks. You're looking for sanctuary. Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. My father was a businessman in San Antonio. He crossed the wrong people. They killed him and came after me. I managed to escape, but they'll be looking. Zane absorbed this information without visible reaction. These people, they have connections. Influence? Yes, she whispered. One of them is a former state senator. They control half the businesses in San Antonio and have friends in every town between here and there. I see. His expression hardened. Well, the ranch is remote. Not many visitors. You should be safe there while you figure out your next move. Katherine felt a rush of gratitude, tempered by lingering suspicion. Why are you helping me, Mr. Zane? Truly. He was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, let's just say I know what it's like to need a second chance. The remainder of the journey passed in comfortable silence. As they crested a hill, Zane pointed ahead. There it is, Sunrise Ranch. Katherine followed his gesture and saw a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled in a small valley. Several outbuildings stood nearby, and a corral held about a dozen horses. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. It's not much, Zane said, but it's peaceful. It's lovely, Katherine replied honestly, struck by the simple beauty of the place. As they approached, a door to one of the outbuildings opened, and a Mexican man in his 50s emerged, waving in greeting. That's Manuel Garcia, Zane explained. He helps with the cattle and horses. His wife, Elena, comes by twice a week to help with laundry and such, but they live in a small place about a mile down the road. Katherine nodded, taking in this information as they pulled up to the main house. Zane dismounted and came around to help her down from the wagon. Manuel, he called as the older man approached. This is Miss Katherine Kendricks. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. Manuel smiled warmly and nodded. Welcome, señorita. It will be good to have someone looking after this one again. He jerked his thumb toward Zane. He works too hard and forgets to eat. Katherine returned his smile tentatively. Thank you for the welcome, Mr. Garcia. Just Manuel, please. He turned to Zane. The new fence on the north pasture is finished, patron, and I moved the mare with the colt to the smaller corral as you asked. Good work, Zane replied. I'll check on them after I show Miss Kendricks around. Manuel tipped his hat to Katherine and returned to his tasks. Zane gestured toward the house. Let me show you where you'll be staying. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a sturdy two-story structure built of wood and stone. Inside, the furnishings were simple but of good quality. A large living area opened onto a dining room and kitchen. A staircase led to the upper floor. My room is upstairs at the end of the hall, Zane explained as he led her up the stairs. This will be yours. He opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a large window overlooking the valley. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a small writing desk comprised the furnishings. There's a washroom at the end of the hall, he continued. The kitchen is fully stocked and I've had running water put in a luxury out here, but worth every penny. Katherine entered the room, stunned by its comfort after weeks of uncertainty. This is more than generous, Mr. Zane. It's what the position offers, he said simply. Your duties would include cooking meals, keeping the house in order, and handling the regular shopping list when Manuel goes to town for supplies. Laundry when Elena isn't here. I'm usually out with the cattle or horses during the day, so you'll have the house to yourself mostly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small pouch. Here's an advance on your wages. There are some dresses in the trunk there left by the previous housekeeper. She was about your size. Feel free to use them until you can get your own things. Katherine accepted the pouch with trembling fingers. Thank you, Zane nodded. Get settled in. Rest if you need to. I'll be out with the horses if you need anything. With that, he left her alone in the room that was now hers. Katherine sat heavily on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her fortunes. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt the vise grip of fear loosen slightly in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to believe she was truly safe. The men hunting her were persistent and powerful. But for now, in this remote valley with the enigmatic Preston Zane, she had found a temporary haven. Katherine spent the remainder of that first day exploring the house and familiarizing herself with the kitchen. She found it well stocked with staples and decided to prepare a proper meal as a way to begin earning her keep. By the time Zane returned to the house in the early evening, the aroma of beef stew and fresh biscuits filled the air. He paused in the doorway, his expression one of pleased surprise. "Something smells good," he commented, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. Katherine, who had changed into one of the dresses from the trunk, a simple blue calico that fit reasonably well, nodded toward the table she had set. "Dinner will be ready shortly. There's water for washing up if you'd like." A hint of a smile crossed Zane's features. "Already taking charge, I see." "I hope I haven't overstepped," Katherine said quickly. "Not at all." He headed toward the washroom. Been a while since someone cooked a proper meal in this house. When he returned, they sat down to eat. Katherine served the stew and watched anxiously as he took his first bite. "This is excellent," he said after a moment. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother taught me before she passed," Katherine replied. "My father and I had a cook in San Antonio, but I still enjoyed preparing meals occasionally." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Katherine found herself studying her employer when he wasn't looking. Despite his rough exterior, there was something undeniably compelling about Preston Zane. His hands were calloused from hard work, but his manners were impeccable. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and direct. "Tell me about your life in San Antonio," he said eventually. "If you don't mind talking about it." Katherine hesitated, then decided there was little harm in sharing the general details. "My father owned several businesses, a shipping company primarily, but also investments in railroads and banking. We lived comfortably. I was educated by private tutors, expected to make a good match one day." She smiled faintly at the memory. "Father was particular about my suitors, said most of them were more interested in his money than in me." "Was he right?" "Probably," she shrugged. "It hardly matters now." "What happened?" Zane asked quietly. "With your father's business." Katherine's grip tightened on her fork. "He discovered one of his partners was embezzling funds and using the shipping company to transport illegal goods. When he confronted him and threatened to go to the authorities, the man had him killed." Her voice wavered. "They made it look like a robbery gone wrong." "I'm sorry," Zane said, his expression somber. "They came for me the next day," Katherine continued, the words spilling out now. "Said I needed to sign over father's assets for my own protection. When I refused, the man's son tried to force me. I escaped through a servant's entrance and fled the city with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a small amount of money sewn into my dress. This partner, he was the former state senator you mentioned." Katherine nodded. "Senator William Blackburn. He's retired now, but his influence is still considerable. His son, James, is the one who—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Zane's expression darkened. "And they've been pursuing you since then?" "Yes. I've stayed in small towns, taking whatever work I could find, but they always seem to catch up. I thought Laredo might be far enough away, but I'm not sure anywhere is safe anymore." "You're safe here," Zane said firmly. Blackburn's reach is long, but not many people know about this ranch, and those who do aren't the type to talk to men like him. Katherine wanted desperately to believe him. "Thank you, Mr. Zane." "Just Zane is fine," he replied. "Mr. Zane makes me sound like someone's banker." A smile tugged at her lips. "Very well, Zane." After dinner, Katherine insisted on cleaning up while Zane retired to his study, a small room off the main living area, filled with books that surprised Katherine with their variety and quality. "You're welcome to borrow any of these," he said, noticing her interest as she brought him a cup of coffee. "Not much entertainment out here otherwise." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely pleased at the prospect of having books to read again. "You have quite a collection for a man who won his ranch in a poker game." A faint smile crossed his face. "I wasn't always a drifter or a rancher. Books are old friends that travel well." Katherine's curiosity about his past grew, but she sensed he was as reluctant to share his story as she had been about hers. She bid him good night and returned to her room, where she fell into the first truly restful sleep she'd had in weeks. The days at Sunrise Ranch quickly developed a comfortable routine. Katherine rose early to prepare breakfast for Zane before he headed out to work with the cattle or horses. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually making small improvements to the house, arranging wildflowers in vases, repositioning furniture for better use of space, organizing the pantry more efficiently. In the evenings, they would share dinner, their conversations gradually growing longer and more personal. Katherine learned that Zane had a dry sense of humor beneath his serious exterior, and a vast knowledge of literature that belied his frontier appearance. He never pressed her for more details about her past, and she extended him the same courtesy, though her curiosity about him grew with each passing day. Manuel and his wife, Alina, welcomed Katherine warmly on the older woman's first visit after Katherine's arrival. Alina, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took one look at Katherine's borrowed clothes and insisted on helping her alter them for a better fit. "You too skinny," Alina declared as she pinned the waist of a dress. "Need to eat more. Senor Zane, he too skinny also before. Now he eats good again because of you." Katherine flushed at the implication. "I'm just doing the job he hired me for." Alina gave her a knowing look. "I see how he watches you when you're not looking, different than before." "I'm sure you're mistaken," Katherine insisted, though a strange flutter stirred in her chest. Alina merely smiled and continued her work with the pins. A month passed, and Katherine found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. The fear that had been her constant companion since her father's death began to recede, though she never fully let down her guard. Whenever Manuel made his weekly trip to Laredo for supplies, she gave him a list, but never accompanied him, afraid of being recognized. One evening in late summer, a powerful thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Katherine had prepared a hearty beef and vegetable pie for dinner, but as the hour grew later and the storm intensified, Zane had not returned to the house. Worry gnawed at her as lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the windows. When she could stand it no longer, she grabbed a lantern and a heavy coat, venturing out onto the covered porch to search the darkness for any sign of him. The rain came down in sheets, transforming the yard into a sea of mud. Katherine held the lantern high, straining to see through the downpour. Relief washed over her when she spotted a figure emerging from the barn, leading a horse. Zane was soaked to the skin, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders as he guided his favorite stallion toward the shelter of the stable. Katherine hurried back inside to stoke the fire and prepare hot coffee, her heart racing with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. When he finally entered the house, water streaming from his clothes and creating puddles on the floor, Katherine rushed forward with a towel. "You're drenched. Quick, get those wet clothes off before you catch your death." The words tumbled out before she could consider how they sounded. A flush crept up her neck as Zane raised an eyebrow, a rare grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, madam," he drawled, accepting the towel and running it over his dripping hair. "I mean that is," Katherine stammered, flustered by her own forwardness. "I'll fetch you dry clothes while you change by the fire. Dinner's waiting." She hurried upstairs to his room, her cheeks burning. In the 2 months she'd been at the ranch, she'd grown comfortable with their routine. But moments like this still caught her off guard, reminders that she was living alone with a man who was neither her husband nor her relative, an arrangement that would have scandalized her former social circle in San Antonio. When she returned with dry clothing, Zane had removed his soaked shirt and boots, standing before the fire in just his trousers. Katherine stopped short in the doorway, transfixed by the sight of his bare torso illuminated by the firelight. His back was to her, revealing a muscular frame marked by several scars, one particularly long one that ran diagonally across his left shoulder blade. He must have sensed her presence, for he turned, his expression unreadable as he caught her staring. Katherine thrust the dry clothes toward him, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "Thank you," he said simply, taking the bundle from her hands. "I'll change and join you for dinner shortly." Katherine nodded mutely and retreated to the kitchen, where she busied herself with serving the food that had been keeping warm in the oven. By the time Zane joined her at the table, dressed in the dry clothes she'd brought, she had regained her composure. "The cattle are all accounted for," he reported as they ate. "Had to chase down a few strays before the worst of the storm hit. That young bull is still giving me trouble." "I was worried when you didn't return," Katherine admitted. Zane looked up from his plate, his blue eyes searching her face. "Were you?" Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "Of course. It's a terrible storm." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued eating, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and occasional rumbles of thunder. After dinner, instead of retiring to his study as usual, Zane lingered at the table, watching as Katherine cleared the dishes. "Leave those," he said when she began to wash up. "Sit with me a while." Surprised by the request, Katherine dried her hands and returned to the table. Zane poured 2 small glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept for special occasions, sliding one across to her. "I'm not much of a drinker," she protested mildly. "Just to ward off the chill," he suggested. "Storm like this gets into your bones." Katherine took a tentative sip, the liquor burning a path down her throat. "That's potent." A ghost of a smile touched Zane's lips as he took a more substantial swallow of his own drink. "Katherine," he began, and she started slightly at his use of her first name. "You've been here 2 months now." "Yes," she agreed, wondering where this conversation was heading. "Are you happy here?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, I believe I am. It's peaceful. I feel safe here." Zane nodded slowly. "Good. I've been thinking it might be time for you to venture into town. With me," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "You can't stay hidden away forever." Fear instantly knotted in Katherine's stomach. "I don't think that's wise. If someone recognizes me, Laredo is a long way from San Antonio," Zane reasoned. "And you need things we can't get here, proper clothes of your own, for one thing. Besides, if you're going to stay on permanently, you'll need to become part of the community eventually." Katherine's heart stuttered at his words. "Permanently," Zane met her gaze steadily. "Unless you have other plans." "No," she admitted softly. "I have nowhere else to go. That's not what I'm asking." His voice was gentle but direct. "Do you want to stay here, Katherine? Not because you have nowhere else, but because this is where you choose to be." The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple words. Katherine looked down at her hands, then back up at the man across from her, this enigmatic cowboy who had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most. "Yes," she whispered finally. "I want to stay." Something shifted in Zane's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight release of tension she hadn't realized was there. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "Then we'll go to town tomorrow, together. It's time to stop running and start living again." The touch of his hand on hers sent warmth spiraling through Katherine's body. She knew she should withdraw her hand, propriety demanded it, but she couldn't bring herself to break the connection. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I know," Zane replied. "But you're not alone anymore." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Katherine gently pulled her hand away, rising from the table. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done for me." Zane nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some rest. We'll leave for town mid-morning if the weather clears." Katherine retreated to her room, her mind whirling with confusion. In the sanctuary of Sunrise Ranch, she had begun to feel things she thought she'd never feel again after her father's death: safety, contentment, and now, something else. Something that made her pulse quicken when Zane entered a room. Something that had made her heart clench with worry when he was caught in the storm. Something dangerous. Morning arrived with clear skies and a freshly washed landscape, the storm having moved on during the night. Katherine dressed carefully in the best of her borrowed dresses, a forest green cotton with white piping that Alina had altered to fit her slim frame. She pinned her hair up neatly and donned a simple straw hat with a matching green ribbon. When she descended the stairs, Zane was waiting in the living room, dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair still damp from washing. He looked up as she entered, and something in his gaze made her cheeks warm. "You look nice," he said simply. "Thank you." Katherine smoothed her skirt nervously. "Are you certain this is a good idea?" "Yes," he replied with quiet confidence. "The wagon's ready whenever you are." The journey to Laredo seemed shorter than Katherine remembered, perhaps because this time she traveled with purpose rather than desperation. Zane pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her stories about the area that helped distract her from her growing anxiety. As they approached the outskirts of town, Katherine pulled her hat lower over her face. "What if someone recognizes me?" "It's been more than 2 months," Zane reminded her. "And you look different now, healthier, for one thing." He glanced at her appraisingly. "Besides, most folks around here mind their own business." Laredo had changed little since Katherine had stumbled into town that rainy night. The main street bustled with activity: cowboys on horseback, wagons loaded with goods, women shopping or hurrying on errands. Zane guided their wagon to a hitching post in front of the general store. "We'll start here," he said, helping her down. "Get whatever you need. Don't worry about the cost." Katherine's protests died on her lips as he gave her a look that brooked no argument. Inside the store, she selected fabric for new dresses, undergarments, stockings, a sturdy pair of boots, and other necessities she'd been doing without. The store owner's wife, a plump, friendly woman named Mrs. Perkins, helped her choose items and took measurements for dresses to be made up. "You're staying out at Zane's place?" the woman asked conversationally as she wrapped Katherine's purchases. "Yes," Katherine replied cautiously. "I'm his housekeeper." Mrs. Perkins nodded, though something in her expression suggested she was drawing her own conclusions. "He's a good man, Mr. Zane. Keeps to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. Town was mighty suspicious when he first won that ranch from old Davies, but he's proven himself since then." "Has he lived here long?" Katherine asked, unable to resist the opportunity to learn more about her employer. "About 5 years now," Mrs. Perkins replied. "Came from nowhere, won the ranch in that poker game, and set about making it work when everyone expected him to sell up and move on. Surprised us all." She leaned in conspiratorially. "There's talk he used to ride with Hardin's gang years back, but if you ask me, that's just idle gossip. Man like that would be wanted, and Sheriff Mills has never had cause to question Mr. Zane's past." Katherine absorbed this information with interest. She knew John Wesley Hardin was a notorious outlaw who had operated in Texas years earlier. Could Zane have been part of such a gang? It seemed impossible to reconcile with the thoughtful, educated man she had come to know. Yet it would explain his proficiency with a gun and the wariness that never quite left his eyes. Their next stop was the bank, where Zane had business to conduct. Katherine waited in the wagon, watching the townspeople go about their daily activities. A group of cowboys emerged from the saloon where she had first met Zane, their raucous laughter carrying across the street. She tensed when she recognized one of them as Reynolds, the man who had accosted her that night. He hadn't noticed her, but Katherine still shrank back in the wagon seat, pulling her hat lower. When Zane returned, they visited several other stores to purchase supplies for the ranch. By midday, Katherine was exhausted from the unaccustomed activity and constant vigilance. Zane, noticing her fatigue, suggested they have lunch at the hotel restaurant before heading back. "It's respectable," he assured her. "Ladies often dine there." The hotel dining room was indeed genteel by frontier standards, with white tablecloths and proper silverware. As they were shown to a table, Katherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Clearly, Preston Zane dining with a lady was an unusual sight in Laredo. "Everyone is staring," she murmured after they ordered. "Let them," Zane replied with unconcern. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about by next week." They were nearly finished with their meal when the dining room door opened to admit a tall, well-dressed man with a silver-streaked beard. The newcomer paused, surveying the room until his gaze landed on their table. His face broke into a smile as he approached. "Preston Zane, as I live and breathe," the man exclaimed. "Didn't expect to find you in town in the middle of the week." Zane rose to shake the man's hand. "Judge Parker, what brings you to Laredo?" "Circuit duties," the judge replied. "Just arrived on the morning stage. Planning to hold court tomorrow for a few minor cases." His attention shifted to Katherine. "And who is this lovely lady?" "Katherine Kendricks," Zane introduced her. "My housekeeper. Katherine, this is Judge William Parker, circuit judge for this district." Katherine offered her hand, which the judge took with a slight bow. "A pleasure, Miss Kendricks. I must say, Zane, your staff certainly outshines any housekeeper I've ever employed." Katherine blushed at the compliment, but something in the judge's assessing gaze made her uncomfortable. He seemed to be looking at her too intently, as if trying to place her face. "Please join us, Judge," Zane offered, though Katherine noted a certain tension in his voice. "Thank you, but I've already arranged to dine with Sheriff Mills," Parker declined. "Perhaps another time. Good day to you both." With a tip of his hat, he moved to another table where a man in a sheriff's badge waited. "He seemed to be studying me," Katherine whispered once the judge was out of earshot. Zane's expression was guarded. "Judge Parker has a good memory for faces. Best we finish up and head back to the ranch." They completed their meal quickly and left the hotel. As Zane helped her into the wagon, Katherine caught sight of the judge watching them through the restaurant window, his expression thoughtful. The return journey was quieter than their trip into town. Katherine, unsettled by the encounter with the judge, kept glancing behind them as if expecting pursuit. You think he recognized me?" she finally asked when they were halfway back to the ranch. Zane considered the question carefully before answering. "Hard to say. Parker travels extensively in his circuit. If he's ever been to San Antonio or seen your picture in a newspaper." Catherine's stomach clenched with renewed fear. "What should we do?" "Nothing for now," Zane replied. "Even if he did recognize you, he has no reason to connect you to any wrongdoing." "You're not wanted for any crime, are you?" "No," Katherine assured him. "But the Blackburns have friends everywhere. If word gets back to them about where I am—" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Zane said firmly. "I didn't bring you to town to frighten you, Katherine. You can't live your life in hiding." "I know," she sighed. "It's just, for a while there I almost forgot I was running from something. Being at the ranch with you, it felt like a different life entirely." Zane glanced at her, his expression softening. "It can be a different life, if that's what you want." The simple statement held layers of meaning that Katherine wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about the cattle and Zane's plans for the upcoming harvest season. Upon their return to the ranch, Katherine busied herself putting away their purchases and preparing dinner. The routine tasks helped calm her nerves, though she couldn't entirely shake the unease that had settled over her since their encounter with Judge Parker. That evening after dinner, as they sat in the living room, Zane reading a newspaper, Katherine working on alterations to one of her new dresses, the sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful silence. Zane was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with a fluid grace that spoke of years of vigilance. "2 riders," he reported, his voice tight, "coming fast." Katherine's needle-stilled fear clutching at her throat. "The Blackburns." "Stay inside," Zane instructed, retrieving his rifle from its place by the door. "I'll handle this." Before she could protest, he was gone, stepping onto the porch and closing the door firmly behind him. Katherine moved to the window, peering through the curtain to see Zane standing on the porch steps, rifle held casually but ready as the riders approached. Relief washed over her when she recognized Manuel riding beside a younger man she didn't know. Zane's posture relaxed as well, though he didn't lower the rifle until the riders came to a stop in front of the house. "Manuel," Zane greeted. "Didn't expect you back from town so soon." "Señor Zane," Manuel replied, his expression grave. "This is Miguel, my cousin's boy from Laredo. He brings news you should hear." Katherine opened the door and stepped onto the porch, unable to contain her curiosity and concern. Zane glanced back at her, then nodded for Manuel and his companion to dismount. "Come inside," he invited. "Katherine, could you make some coffee?" Once they were seated at the kitchen table with steaming cups before them, Miguel, a nervous young man of about 20, related his news. "I work at the livery in town," he explained. "Today, 2 men came asking questions about a woman matching Señorita Kendricks' description. They showed a photograph." Katherine's blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, Señorita," Miguel assured her. "I did not speak to them directly, but they offered money for information and they spoke to many people in town." "Did they give their names?" Zane asked, his face impassive but his eyes hard. Miguel nodded. "One called himself James Blackburn. He said his sister had run away from home and he was concerned for her safety." Katherine made a choked sound of distress. "James is here, in Laredo." "Who is the other man?" Zane pressed. "I did not hear his name, but he was older with gray in his beard. Very well dressed, he did not speak much." "William Blackburn," Katherine whispered. "His father." Zane's jaw tightened. How did they know to look in Laredo? Manuel and Miguel exchanged glances. "There is talk," Manuel said hesitantly, "that Judge Parker recognized the señorita in town today and sent a telegram to San Antonio asking about her." Parker, Zane muttered, understanding dawning on his face. Of course. He would have connections in San Antonio. Catherine's hands trembled so badly that she had to set down her coffee cup. "They've found me." "Miguel," Zane addressed the young man. "Did you hear where these men are staying or what they plan to do next?" "The hotel, senor. They said they would continue asking questions tomorrow. They offered $50 for information leading them to the senorita." "That's a fortune around here," Katherine said bleakly. "Someone will talk." Zane stood abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Manuel, take Miguel back to your place for the night. Come back at first light with the wagon. We need to get Katherine somewhere safe." "Where?" Katherine asked, desperation edging her voice. "Where can I possibly go that they won't find me?" "I know people in New Mexico territory," Zane replied. "People who owe me favors and know how to keep secrets. Manuel will take you there while I deal with the Blackburns." "Deal with them," Katherine repeated, alarmed by his tone. "Zane, these men are dangerous. William Blackburn has powerful friends and James is a killer." "So am I," Zane said quietly, his blue eyes cold in a way Katherine had never seen before. "Or I used to be." The blunt admission silenced her. Manuel and Miguel exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We will go now, Patron," Manuel said, rising from his seat. "Elena will prepare food for the journey. We return at dawn." Once they had left, Katherine confronted Zane. "What did you mean you used to be a killer?" Zane sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "It's a long story, Katherine." "We appear to have time," she countered, needing to understand this man who had become so important to her. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you might not like what you hear." They moved to the living room, where Zane poured himself a measure of whiskey before beginning his tale. "I was born in Missouri to decent folks who worked a small farm. When I was 16, raiders burned our place to the ground during the border troubles. Killed my parents while I was in town." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I tracked those men for 2 years before I caught up with them in Kansas, killed them all." Katherine listened in silence, her heart aching for the boy he had been. "After that, I drifted," he continued. "Took whatever work came my way, some legal, some not. Rode with some rough men for a while, including a spell with Hardin's outfit. I was good with a gun and didn't much care if I lived or died." "What changed?" Katherine asked softly. A shadow crossed Zane's face. "Got hired as a guard for a wealthy merchant traveling to California. Halfway there, I discovered he was trafficking young Chinese girls for brothels. I helped the girls escape instead." He took a swallow of whiskey. "The merchant put a price on my head. I've been living under my mother's maiden name ever since." "Zane isn't your real name," he shook his head. "Preston's my given name. Zane is a reinvention. And the ranch. You really won it in a poker game." A faint smile touched his lips. "That part's true. Seemed like a sign, a chance to put down roots, live honestly. Been trying to do that ever since." Katherine absorbed his story, seeing him with new eyes. The pieces of the puzzle that was Preston Zane were beginning to fit together: his proficiency with weapons, his wariness around strangers, his understanding of her need to escape her past. "So when you found me that night in the saloon, I recognized someone running from ghosts," he finished for her. "Same as I've been doing for years." Katherine moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his rough hand in hers. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Zane looked down at their joined hands. "Now you understand why I can handle the Blackburns. I've dealt with worse men in my time." "No," Katherine said firmly. "I won't have you risking your life or your freedom for me. These past months at Sunrise Ranch have been the happiest I can remember, even with the fear. I won't see you hurt because of my troubles." "Katherine, listen to me," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. William Blackburn murdered my father because he threatened to expose their criminal activities if anything happened to you." Her voice broke. I couldn't bear it. Zane reached up to touch her cheek gently. "Nothing's going to happen to me, but I won't let them take you." Katherine leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Then we'll leave together, tonight, before Manuel returns." "Run away," Zane's brow furrowed. "I've built a life here, Katherine. And I've come to love that life," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "With you." Silence fell between them as the implications of her confession hung in the air. Zane's expression softened, his blue eyes warming as they studied her face. "Say that again," he murmured. Katherine swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "I've come to love this life with you. I've come to love you." Zane's hand moved from her cheek to cradle the back of her neck, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched. "I thought I was imagining it," he whispered, "the way you looked at me sometimes." "I tried not to," Katherine confessed. "I told myself I was just grateful for your protection, that it wasn't proper with me being your employee." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Proper has never been my strong suit, Miss Kendricks." And then he was kissing her, his lips gentle but insistent against hers. Katherine melted into the embrace, her arms sliding around his neck as years of proper upbringing gave way to the longing she had been denying for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers again. "I love you too," he said simply. "Have almost from the start, I think." Katherine smiled, joy blooming in her chest despite the danger hanging over them. "What are we going to do?" Zane's expression grew serious again. "We're not running. This is our home, and I'm tired of letting the past dictate my future." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Pack what you need for a few days. I'm taking you to stay with Manuel and Alina tonight just to be safe. Then tomorrow, I'm going to town to end this." "Zane, please, trust me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I have a plan that doesn't involve gunplay. Judge Parker may have recognized you, but he's a fair man. If we can get him to hear the truth about your father's murder and the Blackburns' crimes, he has the authority to help us." Katherine considered his words, torn between fear and hope. "You really think a judge will take my word over that of a former state senator?" "Not your word alone," Zane replied. "But I'm betting your father left evidence of their crime somewhere, something the Blackburns want badly enough to chase you across Texas." Realization dawned on Katherine's face. "Father's ledger. He kept a special record book in his study safe. The night before he died, I saw him adding entries to it. He seemed troubled." "And you think this ledger would prove the Blackburns' guilt?" "It must," Katherine reasoned. "Why else would they be so desperate to find me? They ransacked our house after Father's death, but they never found the ledger because it wasn't in the safe." "Where was it?" Zane asked, excitement coloring his voice. Katherine's eyes widened. "With me. Father gave it to me the morning of his death, told me to keep it safe. Said it was insurance." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "I sewed it into the lining of my traveling valise, the one thing I managed to grab when I fled San Antonio." "And where is this valise now?" "Under my bed," Katherine replied. "I haven't opened it since I arrived. Everything inside reminded me too much of home." Minutes later, they knelt beside Katherine's bed as she pulled out a small, battered leather valise. With trembling fingers, she opened it and began removing the few possessions she'd managed to save: a photograph of her parents, a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother, a small silver hairbrush. Finally, she turned the valise inside out, revealing a carefully sewn pocket in the lining. From this hiding place, she extracted a small leather-bound book. "This is it," she breathed, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Father's private ledger." Zane took the book and flipped through its pages, his expression growing grimmer with each turn. Dates, names, amounts, he murmured. Shipments of opium hidden among legitimate cargo, bribes to customs officials, payoffs to politicians. He looked up at Katherine. Your father documented everything. That's why they killed him, Katherine said softly, and why they won't stop looking for me. They think I know what's in this book. And now you do, Zane replied, closing the ledger. This is enough to bring down William Blackburn and his entire operation. Judge Parker will have to act on evidence this compelling. Hope flickered to life in Katherine's heart. You really think this could end? That I could stop running? Zane nodded, taking her hands in his. I do. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe for the night. I don't want to risk the Blackburns finding you here before we can speak to Parker. They quickly packed what they would need, and Zane saddled his horse. The night was clear and cool as they rode together toward Manuel's small home a mile away, the ledger secured inside Zane's coat. Elena welcomed them with concern etched on her kind face, quickly preparing a place for Katherine to sleep, while Zane explained their plan in hushed tones to Manuel. I will ride with you to town tomorrow, Patron, Manuel insisted. These men, they are dangerous. No, Zane replied firmly. I need you to stay here and protect the women. If anything happens to me, get Katherine to your cousin in New Mexico as we discussed. Katherine, overhearing this conversation, felt fear clutch at her heart anew. The thought of Zane facing the Blackburns alone was unbearable. When it came time for Zane to leave, Katherine pulled him aside, grasping his hands tightly in hers. Promise me you'll be careful, she whispered. Promise me you'll come back. Zane touched her cheek tenderly. I promise. This time tomorrow, it will all be over and we can start our life together properly. What do you mean? A smile touched his lips. I mean, Katherine Kendricks, that when this is finished, I intend to ask you a very important question, one that has nothing to do with housekeeping. Katherine's breath caught in her throat as she understood his meaning. I'll be waiting for that question, she whispered. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, before mounting his horse and disappearing into the night. Katherine watched until the darkness swallowed him completely, her heart both lighter and heavier than it had ever been. Dawn broke over Laredo as Preston Zane rode into town. The streets were quiet, most businesses still closed at this early hour. He tied his horse outside the hotel and entered the lobby, approaching the sleepy clerk at the front desk. I need to speak with Judge Parker, he stated. It's urgent. The clerk yawned widely. Judge is in room 203, but he don't usually receive visitors before breakfast. This can't wait, Zane insisted, already heading for the stairs. Judge William Parker, already dressed despite the early hour, opened his door on the second knock. His eyebrows rose in surprise at the sight of his visitor. Zane, what brings you here at this ungodly hour? I need to speak with you privately, Judge. It's a matter of life and death. Parker's expression grew serious as he stepped aside to allow Zane entry. This wouldn't have anything to do with your lovely housekeeper, would it? The one I met yesterday. It has everything to do with her, Zane confirmed, removing his hat as he entered the room. And with William and James Blackburn, who I believe are also staying at this hotel. Parker's eyes narrowed. The Blackburns arrived yesterday evening, asking about a young woman they claim is William's ward who ran away from home. They seemed quite concerned for her welfare. They're lying, Zane stated flatly. Katherine Kendricks is the daughter of Harold Kendricks, a shipping merchant from San Antonio who was murdered 3 months ago. The Blackburns are responsible for his death and are now hunting Katherine to silence her. The judge's expression remained carefully neutral. Those are serious accusations, Zane. Do you have any evidence to support them? In answer, Zane withdrew the ledger from inside his coat and placed it on the small writing desk in Parker's room. Harold Kendricks kept meticulous records of the Blackburns' criminal activities: opium smuggling, bribery, extortion. When he threatened to expose them, they had him killed. Parker picked up the ledger and began examining its contents, his judicial facade giving way to genuine shock as he turned the pages. "This is extraordinary. Names, dates, amounts, even locations of shipments." He looked up at Zane. "Where did you get this?" "From Katherine. Her father gave it to her for safekeeping the day he was murdered. She's been running ever since, staying one step ahead of the Blackburns until she reached Laredo 2 months ago." The judge closed the book and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "If these records are authentic, and they appear to be, they implicate not just the Blackburns but several prominent officials in San Antonio and beyond." He fixed Zane with a penetrating stare. "Why bring this to me? You could have taken Miss Kendricks and disappeared." "Because she deserves justice, not a life on the run," Zane replied simply. "And because I'm tired of running myself." Understanding dawned in Parker's eyes. "I always suspected there was more to your story than winning a ranch in a poker game." "There is," Zane acknowledged. "But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I need your help to protect Katherine and see the Blackburns brought to justice." Parker considered for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "I'll need to verify these records, of course, but there's more than enough here to justify immediate action. Wait here." The judge left the room, returning 15 minutes later with Sheriff Mills in tow. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, listened grimly as Parker explained the situation. "So you want me to arrest William Blackburn?" "Former state senator William Blackburn?" Mills asked incredulously. "Based on the evidence in this ledger, yes," Parker confirmed. "Both him and his son James, on suspicion of murder and numerous other crimes." Mills scratched his head doubtfully. "They're staying in the best suite in the hotel, Judge. Got 2 hired guns with them, 2 mean-looking fellows." "All the more reason to move quickly before they realize we have the ledger," Zane interjected. The sheriff sighed heavily. "All right, but I want you with me, Zane. Word is you're handy with a gun if things go south." "I'll accompany you as well," Parker added. "My judicial presence may help prevent violence." Less than an hour later, Zane found himself standing behind Sheriff Mills and Judge Parker as they knocked on the door of the Blackburns' hotel suite. The hallway was quiet, most guests still asleep or at breakfast. The door was opened by a hard-faced man with a gun visible beneath his open vest. He scowled at the visitors. "What do you want?" "We need to speak with William and James Blackburn," Sheriff Mills stated officially. "Official business." The man hesitated, then stepped back, allowing them entry into a spacious sitting room where William Blackburn sat at a table eating breakfast. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed, his clothing expensive and well-tailored. "Sheriff Mills, Judge Parker," he greeted them with apparent pleasantry. "To what do I owe this early morning visit?" His gaze settled on Zane, his expression cooling. "And who is this gentleman?" "Preston Zane," the sheriff introduced him. "Local rancher." Recognition flickered in Blackburn's eyes. "Ah, yes. I believe I heard your name mentioned yesterday in connection with a young woman I'm looking for. My ward, Katherine." "She's not your ward," Zane stated coldly. "She's Harold Kendricks' daughter, and you murdered her father." Blackburn's expression hardened. "That's a slanderous accusation, sir. I would advise you to retract it immediately." "I'm afraid we have evidence that suggests otherwise, Mr. Blackburn," Judge Parker interjected, producing the ledger. "Harold Kendricks' private records detailing your criminal enterprises over the past 5 years." All color drained from Blackburn's face as he stared at the book. "Where did you get that?" from Miss Kendricks, Parker replied, along with her sworn statement regarding the events surrounding her father's death. The sound of a door opening interrupted them as James Blackburn emerged from an adjoining bedroom, hastily tucking in his shirt. He was a handsome man in his 30s with cold eyes that narrowed dangerously at the sight of the visitors. "What's going on here, father?" he demanded. William Blackburn's composure cracked slightly. "They have Harold's ledger, James." Understanding and alarm crossed the younger Blackburn's face. His hand moved toward his hip, where Zane could see the outline of a pistol beneath his coat. "I wouldn't," Sheriff Mills warned, his own hand resting on his gun. "You're both under arrest on suspicion of murder, smuggling, bribery, and conspiracy. Best come along peacefully." "This is absurd," William Blackburn blustered, rising to his feet. "Do you have any idea who I am? One telegram to the governor and your careers are finished, both of you." "The governor is mentioned extensively in this ledger," Judge Parker noted dryly. "I doubt he'll be eager to associate himself with you once its contents become public." James Blackburn's eyes darted between the judge, the sheriff, and Zane, calculating odds. The hired gun by the door shifted nervously, clearly awaiting instructions. "Where is the girl?" James demanded suddenly, his gaze fixing on Zane. "Where is Katherine?" "Safe," Zane replied evenly. "Far beyond your reach." "She's mine," James snarled, his composure slipping completely. "I've tracked her across half of Texas. She belongs to me." "James, be quiet," his father ordered sharply, but the younger Blackburn was beyond restraint, his obsession with Katherine overtaking his judgment. "I offered to marry her after her father died, to protect her, give her my name. But she refused me, ran like a thief in the night." His voice rose with each word. "No one refuses James Blackburn." Zane's hand inched closer to his gun, recognizing the dangerous gleam in the other man's eyes. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "I believe Mr. Blackburn just confessed to pursuing Miss Kendricks against her will." "Indeed he did," Mills agreed, his own tension evident. "Now, gentlemen, are you coming quietly, or do we need to do this the hard way?" For a moment, it seemed as though surrender would prevail. Then James moved with startling speed, drawing his pistol and lunging toward Judge Parker, clearly intending to use the judge as a hostage. Zane reacted instinctively, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. James Blackburn crumpled to the floor, clutching his arm where Zane's bullet had struck. The hired gun by the door reached for his weapon but froze when Sheriff Mills' gun pressed against his temple. "That was unwise, son," Mills told the wounded man as he kicked James' fallen pistol away. "Assaulting a federal judge adds years to your sentence." William Blackburn had gone utterly still, staring at his wounded son with an expression of disgust rather than concern. "Fool," he muttered. "Always ruled by your passions." Within minutes, the sheriff had both Blackburn's and their hired gun in custody, marching them through the hotel lobby under the astonished gazes of early morning guests and staff. Judge Parker followed, carrying the precious ledger while Zane brought up the rear, his hand never straying far from his gun. At the jail, after the prisoners were secured in cells, Parker pulled Zane aside. "You should bring Miss Kendricks to town. We'll need her formal statement, and she should know that her ordeal is finally over." Relief washed over Zane as the reality sank in it was truly finished. Katherine was safe. "I'll fetch her right away," he promised. "One more thing, Zane," Parker added, his expression serious. "Your quick action today likely saved my life, and I won't forget that. But I'm still curious about your own past." Zane met the judge's gaze steadily. "When this is settled, I'll tell you everything, Judge. No more secrets." Parker nodded, seemingly satisfied with this promise. "I look forward to it." Now go bring your lady home." Katherine paced anxiously in Alina's small kitchen, unable to eat or rest as she waited for news from town. Manuel had taken up a watchful position on the porch, rifle across his knees, while Alina tried unsuccessfully to distract Katherine with conversation and tasks. "He will return, señorita," Alina assured her for the dozenth time. "Señor Zane is a careful man." "It's been hours," Katherine fretted, glancing again at the small clock on the mantel. "What if something went wrong? What if the Blackburns, Manuel?" Alina suddenly exclaimed, hurrying to the window. "A rider comes." Katherine rushed to look, her heart leaping at the sight of a familiar figure on horseback approaching at a gallop. Without waiting for Manuel's confirmation, she burst through the door and ran down the path toward the oncoming rider. Zane dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, catching Katherine in his arms as she flung herself at him. "It's over," he murmured into her hair as he held her tightly. "The Blackburns are in custody. You're safe now." Tears of relief and joy spilled down Katherine's cheeks as she clung to him. "Truly, it's really over, truly," he confirmed, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "Judge Parker has the ledger. He's already sent telegrams to authorities in San Antonio. The Blackburns will stand trial for your father's murder and all their other crimes." "And James?" Katherine asked, unable to keep a tremor from her voice. "He won't hurt you or anyone else ever again," Zane promised. "He tried to attack the judge and got a bullet in his arm for his trouble. He's locked in a cell where he belongs." Katherine buried her face against Zane's chest, overwhelmed by emotions she'd held in check for months. "I can hardly believe it's real," she whispered. "Believe it," Zane said softly, stroking her hair. "Your father's murderers will face justice, and you're free to live your life without looking over your shoulder." She looked up at him, hope blooming in her heart. "Our life," she corrected gently. Zane's expression softened as he cupped her face in his hands. "I believe I mentioned a question I wanted to ask you when this was all over." Katherine's pulse quickened. "I believe you did." To her surprise, Zane actually looked nervous as he took her hands in his. "I'm not a man of refined background or polished words, Katherine. I've lived a harder life than most, made mistakes I'll always regret. But loving you has made me want to be better than I was. You deserve someone better than me, but if you'll have me anyway." "Yes," Katherine interrupted, tears shining in her eyes. "The answer is yes, Preston Zane, whatever the question." A smile broke across his face, not the restrained expression she was accustomed to, but a genuine smile that transformed his weathered features. "I haven't asked yet," he pointed out, amusement coloring his voice. "Then ask," she urged, happiness bubbling through her like a spring. With deliberate ceremony, Zane lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "Katherine Kendricks, will you marry me? Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner, the woman I love more than life itself." "Yes," Katherine whispered, her heart so full it might burst. "Yes, with all my heart." Zane rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and protection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and radiant with joy, Manuel and Alina were watching from the porch, beaming their approval. "Judge Parker wants to see you in town," Zane told her, keeping an arm around her waist as they walked back toward the house. "He needs your formal statement about the Blackburns." Katherine nodded, no longer afraid at the prospect of facing her past. "When should we go?" "As soon as you're ready," Zane replied. "And afterward, I thought we might visit Reverend Collins at the church in Laredo, unless you want a grand wedding with all the trimmings." Katherine laughed, a sound of pure liberation. "I've had enough of waiting and uncertainty to last a lifetime." Today would not be too soon to become Mrs. Preston Zane. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Katherine gave her testimony to Judge Parker, who treated her with kindness and respect as she recounted the events surrounding her father's murder and her subsequent flight from San Antonio. The ledger provided irrefutable evidence of the Blackburns' crimes, and Parker assured her that justice would be served. True to their word, Katherine and Zane were married by Reverend Collins in a simple ceremony attended by Manuel, Elena, and a few townspeople who had come to know and respect the rancher over the years. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, her first real indulgence with the money Judge Parker had helped her recover from her father's estate. Now released from the legal limbo it had been trapped in during her absence. After the ceremony, they returned to Sunrise Ranch not as employer and housekeeper, but as husband and wife. Standing on the porch of what was now truly their home, Zane lifted Katherine into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zane," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the familiar living room, now decorated with wildflowers Elena had arranged for the occasion. "It feels different somehow," Katherine observed, looking around the house that had been her sanctuary for months. "Knowing it's really ours, that we don't have to pretend anymore." "No more pretending," Zane agreed, drawing her close. "No more secrets, no more running." That night, as she lay in her husband's arms, Katherine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place of happiness. From the terrified young woman who had stumbled into a Laredo saloon on a rainy night, to the confident bride who had pledged her life to a man with a past as complicated as her own. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked softly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how much can change in a few months," she replied. "That night in the saloon, I was so certain my life was over, I had nothing left but fear." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I remember thinking you looked like a half-drowned kitten, beautiful and frightened and too proud to ask for help." Katherine smiled at the memory. "I told you I didn't deserve your kindness. And I promised to teach you what you deserved," he finished, turning her in his arms to face him. "I hope I'm keeping that promise." "Every day," she assured him, resting her hand against his cheek. "And I'll spend my life doing the same for you, Preston Zane." 1 year later, Sunrise Ranch had flourished under their joint care. With the legal matters in San Antonio resolved, the Blackburns convicted and sentenced to prison for their crimes, Katherine had been able to reclaim a portion of her father's fortune. They had invested in expanding the ranch, increasing their cattle herd and adding modern improvements to the house and outbuildings. The small family grew as well. On a crisp autumn morning, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named Harold Manuel Zane, in honor of her father and their loyal friend. The baby had his father's startling blue eyes and his mother's dark curls. As winter gave way to spring, life settled into a rhythm of peaceful contentment that neither Katherine nor Zane had dared hope for in their troubled pasts. The ranch prospered, their son thrived, and their love deepened with each passing day. On the anniversary of their wedding, Zane surprised Katherine with a picnic beside the small creek that ran through their property. Little Harry, now 6 months old, lay on a blanket beside them, gurgling happily at the dappled sunlight filtering through the cottonwood trees. "I have something for you," Zane said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet box. Katherine opened it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a miniature photograph of the three of them, taken when Harry was just a few weeks old. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes as Zane fastened it around her neck. "Not half as beautiful as you," he replied, brushing a kiss against her lips. or the life you've given me." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, watching their son batting at a butterfly that had landed near his blanket. "Did you ever imagine we could be this happy?" she asked. Zane's arm tightened around her waist. "Not until that rainy night when a bedraggled angel walked into a saloon in Laredo." "I wasn't an angel," Katherine protested with a laugh. "I was desperate and terrified." "You were both," he insisted. "And you saved me as surely as I helped you." Katherine turned in his embrace, framing his face with her hands. "I whispered that I didn't deserve kindness, and you promised to teach me what I deserved." "And I'm still teaching you," Zane murmured, drawing her closer. "Every day for the rest of our lives." As they shared a tender kiss beneath the Texas sky, their son's delighted laughter blending with the rustling leaves and the gentle sound of flowing water, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that they had both finally found what they truly deserved: love, family, and the peace that comes from being exactly where you belong. In the years that followed, Sunrise Ranch continued to thrive. Katherine and Preston welcomed 2 more children: a daughter named Alina Rose 3 years after Harry's birth, and another son, William Thomas, 2 years after that. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a new wing added to the original structure and gardens planted that became Katherine's particular pride. Preston's past eventually came to light in full, but Judge Parker, true to his word, chose to focus on the man Zane had become rather than the troubled youth he had been. With the judge's discreet assistance, old warrants were quietly resolved, allowing Preston to live without the shadow of his former life hanging over him. Katherine's experience with the Blackburns led her to become an advocate for other women in difficult circumstances. She established a small foundation using a portion of her inheritance, helping women escape abusive situations and build new lives. Several times a year, the Zane Ranch hosted women and children in transition, providing them temporary sanctuary while they determined their next steps. Through it all, the love between Katherine and Preston remained the cornerstone of their existence, a love forged in desperation and danger, tempered by honesty and mutual respect, and sustained by the daily choice to see in each other not the broken people they had once been, but the strong, loving individuals they had become together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their grown children and a growing brood of grandchildren, Katherine found Preston standing alone on the porch, gazing out at the land that had been their home for more than 2 decades. "What are you thinking about, my love?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. Preston smiled down at her, the years having added silver to his hair but not dimmed the intensity of his blue eyes. "About a frightened woman in a rainy saloon and the words that changed both our lives." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full of the contentment that comes from a life well lived. "I whispered that I didn't deserve kindness, and I said I'd teach you what you deserved," he finished, turning to take her in his arms. "I hope I've kept that promise." "Every day," Katherine assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss the man who had taught her that everyone deserves kindness, but love true. Enduring love is something you earn through courage, honesty, and the willingness to see the best in each other, even in the darkest of times. Every single day,